What's going on, guys? Welcome in. I'm Dr. Cellini. I'm a board certified practicing veterinary neurologist, and in this video I want to go through an article that was recently published that I came across entitled "Welcome to Hell." Very interesting title there. The article interviews multiple veterinarians and vet techs to talk about their experiences working for corporate veterinary practices. What the article has given me the opportunity to do is to talk to you about the experiences of the veterinary worker inside the walls of a clinic, contrasted to how veterinary medicine looks on the outside of the hospital from the perspective of companies like Mars and other private equity firms who are constantly buying up vet hospitals. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the article, briefly summarize it. I'm going to go through some of the economics and why veterinary practices are being bought so often by corporate entities, as well as give my thoughts and opinions regarding possible solutions at the end of this video. But before I get started, if you please don't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, I greatly appreciate it. All that stuff helps to grow the channel, and let's get started. So as I mentioned at the top, the article is entitled "Welcome to Hell," and what the article does is interviews multiple workers, mainly technicians, who work for or used to work for veterinary hospitals that were subsequently bought out by subsidiaries of the Mars Group, so companies like VCA and Blue Pearl, for instance. And they interview and get quotes from multiple technicians talking about a lot of pretty harsh and frankly toxic work environments that they describe. Things like, one technician talked about developing MS with epilepsy and how management wasn't willing to work with her and they weren't willing to let her leave on time, is what they claim in the article. Another technician is quoted as saying, "We deceived clients because the hospital was so understaffed that they weren't able to accomplish round-the-clock treatments of any kind." But the article is pretty long. I can't go through the whole thing here. In summary, it paints a picture that shows veterinary hospitals that are initially privately owned, that are then bought out by corporate entities like Mars. They mentioned Mars, which I'll get to in a second. Once that happens, the environment for the workers inside the hospital seems to get, as they claim, a little bit more toxic in some cases. And this leads to a significant amount of worker burnout and in some cases actual physical health problems. They imply this in the article. They don't directly implicate the companies like Mars as causing this sort of an issue, nor am I. I do think the article does a really good job of highlighting and giving a voice to some of the workers who experienced a lot of frustration with this corporate transition. So let's stop for a second and talk about Mars. Mars is an enormous company, obviously. They're a multi-billion-dollar private company, and they're owned by the third richest family in America, the Cellinis. Just kidding. They're owned by the Mars, and I think the Badgers, some combination of them. But anyway, they're owned by the third richest family in America, and they decided in the late 1980s they wanted to get into the pet food industry, and they started buying brands like Eukanuba, Caesars, Royal Canin, Pedigree, and many others. In 2007, Mars decided they wanted to then start buying veterinary hospitals. And in 2007, they purchased Banfield, which is the pet hospital you see inside of PetSmarts across the country. In 2015, they purchased Blue Pearl. And in 2017, they purchased VCA. Blue Pearl and VCA, both at the time, owned multiple dozens to hundreds of specialty, ER, and sometimes general practice hospitals. They purchased so many veterinary hospitals over this 15-year period that the Federal Trade Commission required them to sell some of their practices in 2018 to avoid becoming a monopoly. And at the time of this recording, Mars is by far the biggest veterinary hospital group in the world. They own over 2,000 veterinary clinics in the United States. They just recently started buying practices in Europe and in Asia. And so when we talk about the corporatization and the corporate buyouts of veterinary hospitals, we mostly talk about Mars. There's other companies, but because Mars has such a huge market cap, we talk about them first and foremost. Now, Mars certainly isn't the only company looking to get into the veterinary field. In fact, there's many others that have purchased and consolidated veterinary practices for many years now. But that then begs the question, why are these companies so interested in buying up veterinary practices? Well, the answer is veterinary practices, as it turns out, can be very valuable assets for them in a portfolio.
How's your portfolio? I'd say strong to quite strong.
Now, if I had to guess, I'd say there's a few reasons why veterinary hospitals are viewed as so valuable from the perspective of a corporation like Mars or private equity, venture capital, what have you. One is that people seem to be willing and able to pay for more and more and higher levels of care for their pets lately compared to say 20 years ago. I remember when I started off my career in the early 2000s, the way people viewed animals and their pets doesn't quite seem to be equal to how it is today. People were less willing to go above and beyond and more willing to just stop and not do like a lot of intensive care for their pet. And I think things have changed over the last, let's say 20 years or so. The cultural zeitgeist seems to be one where your pet is viewed as a family member and you're gonna do everything you can for it. In addition, much more people have pet insurance today relative to 20 years ago, and they're able to approve care because pet insurance is reimbursing them about 90% of the bill a lot of the time. So people are more willing and able to pay for their pet's care. This means more revenue for vet hospitals, and more hospital revenue means that they can justify a higher valuation from a corporate entity who wants to buy them. What kind of valuations are we talking about here? Well, corporations are willing to pay 10 times a hospital's gross revenue, give or take. It's a little bit lower with smaller hospitals and a little bit higher with your large 24/7 ER specialty centers. But let's use a placeholder of about 10 times gross revenue per year. So if your hospital grosses $10 million a year, which is actually pretty easy to do if you have a few doctors, and it's very easy to do if you have a multi-specialty referral center, that clinic is worth about $100 million to a corporation, and they're willing to pay that to buy you out. Let that sink in for a second. And in addition to that, the investment is considered a pretty safe one from the perspective of these corporations. The veterinary industry as a whole really did not slow down when the housing market crash happened in 2008. And it certainly, as I talked about in a previous video, didn't slow down in 2020 with the pandemic. So if a recession on the order of the 2008 housing market crash doesn't slow it down, and if a pandemic doesn't slow it down, what will? This is what corporations are noticing, and that's why, again, combined with the valuations of the clinics in the first place, they're willing to put so much money into them to buy them out. But the main thing that I want to point out with this video is that there are two diametrically opposed forces happening in veterinary medicine at the same time. One is at the micro level, what they describe in the article, where inside the walls of a hospital, there can be oftentimes very toxic work environments where workers are not treated fairly, they're overworked, they're chronically understaffed, and this is all happening in part, as the article alludes to, due to the kind of prioritization of profits and trying to maintain a certain amount of value within a hospital, keeping costs low, keeping profits high, that sort of thing. Opposite of that is what I like to think of as the macro environment, where giant multi-billion-dollar corporations, private equity, venture capital, they are viewing veterinary hospitals as these high-valued assets. And even though within those walls there may be total chaos going on, outside of the walls, these hospitals look like absolute gold mines on paper. And so the values are going to continue going up. The owners of these hospitals will continue to be offered gigantic 8 to 9 figure payouts for their hospitals, which they cannot in any good conscience turn down, rightfully so. So I think this is going to continue to happen until something breaks. And I often wonder if there is going to be a bubble that happens in the veterinary industry, or whether or not this industry truly is recession-proof. Time will tell. So guys, as with any problem in the veterinary field, I try to think of like what a solution would be. And with this situation, aside from an actual veterinary bubble happening, akin to like the 2008 market crash with real estate, I think one possible solution that I can think of, I think more veterinarians should just simply start and run their own practices. I think we need to own more of our shit, if you want to think of it that way. And I think by owning more of what we do, that's really the only solution to losing control of our industry to giant corporations like Mars and other companies that may not have our best interests in mind at the end of the day. Or starting your practice is not easy, but I think it's really the only solution here, because otherwise corporations are gonna come at you until veterinary medicine is just completely one, giant pillar of corporate.
Corporate accounts payable, Nina speaking. Just a moment. Corporate accounts payable, Nina speaking. Just a moment.
All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it. Please let me know in the comments below what you think, or if you'd like to have a discussion about any of these topics. Please also, if you don't mind, hitting that like and subscribe button. It greatly helps the channel. I'll put the link to the article in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.